Margaret Sullivan walked down those courthouse steps like she'd just won the lottery, that smug smile plastered across her face, designer purse swinging from her shoulder, already texting her HOA buddies about her victory. She had no idea that in exactly 90 seconds, her entire world would implode. The detectives had been waiting 3 years for this moment, and what she didn't know, what her expensive lawyers didn't know, was that the real evidence had just been submitted 5 minutes ago. Margaret Sullivan had lived in Riverside Meadows for 12 years, and in that time, she'd transformed from friendly neighbor to the community's most feared HOA president. But that Tuesday morning in April, sitting in her immaculate kitchen with its granite countertops and spotless white cabinets, she wasn't thinking about her reputation. She was thinking about the family that had just moved in next door. The Jennings family had arrived 3 weeks earlier. Robert, a veteran who'd lost his left leg in Afghanistan, his wife Clara, who worked double shifts as an ER nurse, and their daughter Emma. 8-year-old Emma had cerebral palsy and used a bright purple wheelchair that she'd decorated with stickers of butterflies and unicorns. Margaret had watched them move in from her kitchen window, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. It wasn't the family she objected to, Margaret told herself. It was the rules. The sacred HOA rules that kept property values high and the neighborhood pristine. Rules she'd spent 5 years meticulously crafting and enforcing with an iron fist that had earned her the nickname Margaret the Menace on the community Facebook page she didn't know existed. The Jennings had violated Section 7, Paragraph 3 within their first week. They'd installed a wheelchair ramp leading to their front door. The ramp was beautifully constructed, made of weather-treated wood that matched their home's exterior, with gentle slopes and sturdy handrails. Robert had built it himself, spending his disability check and every evening for 10 days to ensure his daughter could enter and leave their home safely. Margaret had issued the violation notice on day 11. Structures extending beyond the original home footprint require HOA Architectural Committee approval. She'd written in her formal letter, printed on official HOA letterhead. The ramp must be removed within 14 days or face daily fines of $100. Clara had knocked on Margaret's door that same evening, still in her hospital scrubs, exhaustion carved into every line of her face. "Please," she'd said, her voice cracking. "My daughter can't access our home without that ramp. We'll paint it any color you want. We'll add flowers around it, whatever makes it acceptable. But she needs it." Margaret had stood in her doorway, arms crossed, unmoved. "The rules apply to everyone equally, Mrs. Jennings. That's what makes them fair. You should have sought approval before construction. The ramp comes down, or the fines start Monday." What Margaret didn't mention, what she would never mention, was the real reason. 3 months before the Jennings arrived, Margaret had quietly submitted plans to expand her own back deck, plans that violated the exact same setback requirements. The Architectural Committee, which she chaired, had approved her project in a closed session. But if she made exceptions for disabilities, someone might question why her deck was acceptable. Someone might look deeper into the records she'd carefully buried. The fines started the following Monday, $100 per day. Robert had tried calling, emailing, even showing up to HOA meetings with Emma in her wheelchair, hoping the board members would see reason. But Margaret ran those meetings like military operations, cutting off public comments after exactly 3 minutes, ruling objections out of order, and adjourning before anyone could mount opposition. By week 6, the Jennings owed $4,200. Clara had picked up extra shifts. Robert had sold his truck. They'd hired a lawyer, a young public defender named David Chen, who took the case pro bono after his own sister, who used a wheelchair, told him about it. David had filed an emergency motion citing the Fair Housing Act and ADA requirements. The hearing was set for 3 months later, which meant 3 months of accumulating fines. Margaret's lawyer, a shark named Patricia Blackwood who charged $500 per hour, assured her they'd win easily. HOA rules are contractual agreements, Patricia had explained. They signed them when they purchased. We've got precedent on our side. But Margaret had made one critical mistake. She'd gotten greedy. While the Jennings case crawled through the legal system, Margaret had been busy with other projects. The elderly couple at 247 Oak Street had been fined $6,000 for letting their grass grow to 4 inches instead of the mandated 2.5-inch maximum, while the husband recovered from heart surgery. The single mother at 189 Maple Drive owed $3,800 for parking her 10-year-old sedan in her driveway instead of the garage. The garage she'd converted into a bedroom for her 3 kids after her ex-husband stopped paying child support. Margaret collected these fines like trophies. The money went into the HOA's accounts, which she managed personally. And here's where her perfect system had a flaw she hadn't anticipated. she'd started borrowing from those accounts. It began small, 1,000 here, 1,500 there, always with the intention of paying it back. She'd cover it with next quarter's dues, she told herself. But her husband's business had hit rough waters. Their daughter's private college tuition had jumped. The new luxury SUV had seemed necessary to maintain appearances, and that cruise to Greece had been a 25th anniversary splurge they deserved. The borrowing had grown to $127,000. The day of the Jennings hearing arrived on a crystalline morning in late October. Margaret wore her power suit, navy blue, perfectly tailored, paired with pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother. She met Patricia outside the courthouse, confidence radiating from every pore. Inside, Judge Raymond Carter presided, a 30-year veteran of the bench known for his no-nonsense approach and hidden soft spot for underdogs. The Jennings sat at the defendant's table, Robert in his dress uniform, the empty pant leg pinned up neatly, Emma beside him in her purple wheelchair, drawing pictures with crayons to pass the time. Patricia Blackwood presented Margaret's case with surgical precision. HOA covenants, signed agreements, property values, community standards. She made it sound like the Jennings were trying to tear down the fabric of civilized society by wanting their daughter to enter their home. Then David Chen stood up. He didn't start with the ADA or Fair Housing Act, though those citations would come. He started with Emma. He asked her to show the judge her drawings, pictures of her house, her family, the butterflies she loved. Then he asked Robert to explain what happened when they tried to carry Emma up the front steps during a rainstorm, and he'd slipped on the wet concrete, both of them falling, Emma's chair tumbling down behind them. "She had a concussion, Your Honor," Robert said quietly. 3 stitches, because we couldn't safely get her into our own home. Judge Carter's jaw tightened. David then presented the ADA requirements, the Fair Housing Act protections, the precedents that made Margaret's position not just wrong but illegal. He showed the judge photos of Margaret's own deck extension, the one that violated setback rules but had been mysteriously approved. Patricia Blackwood objected repeatedly, but Judge Carter overruled her each time, his patience visibly thinning. The ruling came swift and decisive. The Jennings could keep their ramp. All fines were dismissed. The HOA would pay the Jennings legal fees. And, this part made Margaret's stomach drop, Judge Carter ordered a complete audit of HOA finances, noting irregularities in how fines were being collected and managed. But technically, Margaret had won the only thing she cared about in that moment. The audit would take months to complete, and until then, no criminal charges could be filed. She wasn't going to jail today. As court adjourned, Margaret actually smiled. She'd call her accountant during lunch, have him create a paper trail, shift some numbers. She'd done it before. This was just another problem to manage. She walked out of that courtroom with her head high, already composing the email she'd send to the HOA board, spinning this as a minor procedural setback. Patricia Blackwood was already on her phone, probably billing these minutes at her premium rate. Margaret pushed through the heavy courthouse doors into the October sunshine, fishing her phone from her purse. She'd descended 3 steps when she heard the voice behind her. "Margaret Sullivan?" She turned, annoyed at the interruption of her exit, expecting maybe a reporter or another neighbor with a complaint. Instead, she found herself face to face with Detective Sarah Rodriguez and Detective Marcus Webb, both holding badges and wearing expressions that made her blood run cold. "Margaret Sullivan, you're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft." The smile died on her face as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. What Margaret didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that David Chen hadn't been working alone, and the case had never really been about a wheelchair ramp. 6 months before the Jennings family ever moved to Riverside Meadows, a woman named Denise Foster had sat in a cramped office at the FBI's white-collar crime division, hands shaking as she pushed a file folder across the desk to Detective Rodriguez. "My mother died because of her," Denise had said, her voice barely above a whisper. Denise's mother, Patricia Foster, had been a widow living on a fixed income at 312 Birch Lane in Riverside Meadows. When Patricia's arthritis made it difficult to maintain her flower garden to HOA standards, Margaret had fined her $50 per day. When Patricia couldn't pay, Margaret had placed a lien on the house Patricia had lived in for 40 years, where she'd raised 3 children, where every room held memories of her late husband. The stress had triggered Patricia's second stroke. She'd died 3 days later in the hospital, never knowing that Denise had already contacted a lawyer. But the lawyer had discovered something strange. The lien paperwork had irregularities. The fine amounts didn't match the violation notices. Money had been collected but never properly deposited into HOA accounts. Denise had taken her evidence to the FBI instead of local police because she suspected the corruption went deeper than one HOA president. She was right. Detective Rodriguez had spent 6 months following the money trail. Margaret's borrowing wasn't just from fine money. She'd been systematically inflating vendor contracts, approving her husband's struggling landscaping company for community maintenance at triple the market rate, and creating fake invoices for services never rendered. The total wasn't $127,000. It was $8 from $47,000, stolen over 8 years from homeowners' dues and special assessments. But white-collar crime cases require airtight evidence. Rodriguez needed Margaret's financial records, her communications, her transaction histories. And Margaret, paranoid about audits, kept everything encrypted on a personal server that the FBI couldn't legally access without probable cause. Probable cause they didn't have until Judge Carter ordered that HOA audit. The moment Judge Carter's gavel fell, the audit order became a legal warrant for all financial records. The accountant Margaret planned to call during lunch. He was already being interviewed by federal agents. The paper trail she planned to create, the original documents were already in evidence bags. David Chen had contacted Rodriguez after taking the Jennings case, recognizing the same patterns Denise Foster had described. They'd coordinated the lawsuit to force the audit, knowing Margaret's arrogance would prevent her from seeing the trap until it was too late. Now, standing on the courthouse steps, Margaret's designer purse slipped from her shoulder and hit the concrete with a thud. Her phone clattered down 3 steps, the screen shattering. Patricia Blackwood, still on her own phone, looked up in shock, then quickly looked away. She hadn't been retained for criminal defense, and she was smart enough to know this was career-ending proximity. "You have the right to remain silent," Detective Webb recited as courthouse security and local police formed a perimeter, holding back the gathering crowd. Margaret found her voice. "This is insane. I haven't done anything wrong. That audit will show." "The audit is complete, Ms. Sullivan," Rodriguez interrupted. "We've had forensic accountants working on your files for the past 72 hours. We know about the fake invoices. We know about your husband's company. We know about the Cayman Islands account." Margaret's face went chalk white. The Cayman Islands account. The one she thought was buried so deep that no one would ever find it. The one her husband didn't even know existed. Behind the detectives, David Chen stood with the Jennings family. Emma waved at Margaret from her purple wheelchair, still clutching her crayons, unaware that her family's fight for a simple ramp had brought down an empire of greed. But there was more. As Rodriguez guided Margaret toward the waiting police car, another figure emerged from the courthouse. Denise Foster, holding a photo of her mother, tears streaming down her face. Behind her came others, the elderly couple from Oak Street, the single mother from Maple Drive, 17 other families in total, all of them holding photos of loved ones, medical bills, eviction notices, the documentation of lives Margaret had systematically destroyed in her quest for control and profit. "My husband had a heart attack because of the stress of those fines," the elderly man called out, his voice breaking. "We almost lost our home of 35 years. The single mother held up her 3 children's school photos. "My kids were sleeping on the floor because I had to choose between paying your fines and buying beds." The crowd wasn't angry or violent. They were grieving, bearing witness to the damage one person's unchecked power had caused. And the news cameras, tipped off by Rodriguez's department, captured every second. Margaret's legs buckled. Webb caught her before she fell, his grip firm but not rough. "Easy now," he said, almost gently. Even criminals deserve dignity in their downfall, he believed. As they reached the police car, Margaret turned back one last time, perhaps hoping to see someone, anyone, who might help her. Instead, she saw the Riverside Meadows community she'd terrorized, standing together on the courthouse lawn. Robert Jennings had his arm around Clara, Emma between them. They weren't smiling. There was no triumph in their eyes, just exhaustion and relief that it was finally over. The car door closed. Through the window, Margaret watched the courthouse steps recede as her perfect world collapsed in real time. Her phone, still shattered on those steps, began buzzing with calls she'd never answer. The HOA board, her friends from the country club, her daughter calling from college, all of them about to learn what she'd done. At the FBI field office, Rodriguez laid out the evidence across a conference table. Bank statements showing the systematic transfers, emails where Margaret discussed creative accounting with her husband, text messages to board members she'd bribed or intimidated, and the Cayman Islands account, opened under a shell corporation funded by special assessments that had never been voted on by the community. Margaret's lawyer, not Patricia Blackwood, but a criminal defense attorney her husband had frantically called, arrived 3 hours later. He reviewed the evidence for 45 minutes before delivering the news Margaret already knew. This was unwinnable. The federal prosecutor offered a deal. Plead guilty to all charges, surrender all assets, cooperate in identifying any co-conspirators, and accept a recommended sentence of 12-15 years, or go to trial and face up to 45 years if convicted on all counts. Margaret's hands trembled as she signed the plea agreement. 12 years. She was 53 years old. She'd be 65 when released, if she survived. Her daughter would be 30, married perhaps, maybe with children Margaret would never know. Her husband would likely divorce her. The lawyers had already confirmed he'd had no knowledge of the offshore account, which meant he might avoid prosecution, but also meant their marriage was built on lies he'd never forgive. 3 months later, at her sentencing hearing, Judge Carter presided again. The courtroom was packed. News crews, Riverside Meadows residents, and in the front row, the Jennings family. Emma had drawn a picture for the judge, a house with a rainbow and butterflies, the kind of innocent art that reminded everyone what this had ultimately been about, a little girl who just wanted to go home safely. Ms. Sullivan, Judge Carter began, removing his glasses, you were given a position of trust within your community. People relied on you to manage their homes, their investments, their quality of life. Instead, you systematically exploited that trust for personal gain. You didn't just steal money, you stole peace of mind, you stole security. In Mrs. Foster's case, you stole time someone could have spent with their mother. He sentenced her to 14 years in federal prison, the higher end of the recommended range. Margaret was led away in chains, her navy blue power suit replaced by an orange jumpsuit. As she passed the Jennings family, Clara reached out and touched her arm. Margaret flinched, expecting anger or hatred. Instead, Clara whispered, I hope you find peace. And somehow, that kindness hurt more than any punishment. Outside the courthouse, those same steps where she'd been arrested, the Riverside Meadows community gathered again. But this time, they were celebrating. The HOA had elected a new board, one committed to serving rather than ruling. The fines against all families were permanently erased, and they'd voted to rename the community playground after Patricia Foster. Robert Jennings had been elected to the new board. His first motion, passed unanimously, was to establish an accessibility fund to help any family in the community who needed modifications for disabled family members. Emma's purple wheelchair had gained a few more stickers, now including one that read, Home is where the ramp is.